Welcome everyone. Thanks for attending today. Looks like we have a fair number of people joining us, so I'm pleased that my co-host today is Nancy Hess. Nancy will be our moderator and stick handling the Zoom controls. My presentation will look at existing and emerging tools to implement organization change. I have three objectives. One is to describe the three basic systems in the real world. Secondly, I'll clarify how models, frameworks, and maps differ. The last one, and the reason why you're probably here, is to decide what should be in one's toolbox. As a change practitioner, I am mindful how organization changes might impact employees like Josh. He is connected in a formal hierarchical structure as well as relationships in an informal network. And if you've worked in a large organization, you probably experienced what I did. I was in one formal organization shown in the company's organizational chart, but in several informal networks. I'd go to coffee or lunch with employees that I went to school with, touch base with friends in an apartment I previously belonged to. I'd join community practices or internal meetup groups that informally met on an as and when basis. And as I moved around the company, I stayed connected. And I found that these relationships helped me to get things done. Understanding how org change practices and tools have evolved requires a brief trip back in time. Humans as a species on Earth have a strong need for order and structure. For centuries, we treated the real world as just one system, order. We now recognize there are two other systems, chaos and complexity. This graph shows the three systems as a single plane. The boundary between order and chaos represents a physical cliff you can fall over. Think of taking a piece of paper and folding it over, creating an edge. This is the edge of chaos, and it's represented by this boundary. The red arc running through complexity means movement between order and chaos is a transitional phase shift, and not an abrupt physical change. The nature of the system constrains how we can act in it. In the order system, the environment is stable, consistent, and repeatable. Because if-then cause-and relationships exist, we can make predictions with confidence. We can apply a mechanistic engineering paradigm, reduce the system into its parts, work on each part, and put everything back together again. The whole is equal to the sum of its parts. A plunge into the chaotic system is always a surprise. In chaos, there are no system constraints, so people exhibit random behavior, especially when the event is novel and never seen before. We label large negative events as crises, catastrophes, disasters. Besides a black swan, we also have black elephants and gray rhinos. These are events that we know exist. We just don't know when and how big. And by that definition, COVID-19 pandemic is a black elephant. It's also a temporary state. You don't stay in it for long. People may run around erratically, but typically, someone acts to get us out of chaos. On the other hand, falling into chaos can reveal positive opportunities. We have a word for that, serendipity. We can also deliberately fall into chaos, contain the initial consequences, and manage the outcomes. And we have a phrase for that too, disruptive innovation. In the complex domain, the environment is uncertain, unpredictable, and ambiguous. It's dispositional, which means if-then causal relationships may or may not exist and can dynamically change. In the order system, we focus on the parts. In the complex system, relationships and interactions are more important than the parts. That means we can't reduce the system down into its parts because we would be ignoring or destroying those links. We must work with the whole system, a holistic ecological versus an engineering perspective. The complex system can feel like the chaotic system. There's a lot of what the heck is going on. The difference is that there is an underlying pattern of order that naturally constrains behavior. And we see that in nature, when birds flock and fish swarm. Another peculiar complexity phenomenon is called emergence. As a simple example, when hot water is poured into a cup with dry coffee grinds, aroma emerges. Because something new can suddenly materialize, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I'd like to introduce a useful concept to understand organizational change: scaffolding. Scaffolding is a temporary way to support new construction, renovations, or repairs. Scaffolding goes away either by removal or by disintegration. In this background photo, bamboo is strapped together as scaffolding in the Asian construction industry. In North America, we like to use very rigid steel tubing and platforms. Contrast that to bamboo, which is light, flexible, and easily reconfigured. In cooking, a jello mold shapes the final product as the liquid gels. In medicine, stitches hold skin repairs in place until they dissolve. Models, frameworks, and maps are scaffolds for organizational change. They too offer support for organizations undergoing new construction, renovations, or repairs. I've seen the terms being used interchangeably. I recently read one article that starts off listing 6 change frameworks and ends up talking about them as models. But there are subtle distinctions. Models represent a person, an object, or an idea. Physical models are typically on a smaller scale than the original. Mental models are generally prescriptive. On the other hand, frameworks are typological containers. They are not prescriptive, but descriptive. They describe different perspectives to make sense of the situation. Each perspective will contain items that have characteristics or traits in common. Maps provide a means of positioning. It could be spatial, as in geographical location, or time, like a timeline. They can communicate to others where you are presently situated, and can afford a sense of direction if planning to move to a new position. Last month, when I was preparing my slides, I looked around for a good example of a physical model. I chose this photo that I took when we visited Legoland 10 years ago. Well, I certainly didn't anticipate the US Capitol building would be on the front pages. This is a Lego designer's smaller scaled representation of an object. It could also represent an idea, the idea of government, or the bigger idea of democracy. I love this quote from George Box. All models are wrong, but some are useful. He has been called one of the great statistical minds of the 20th century. I believe he also said, models don't tell you the answers. They tell you the questions you need to ask. When we talk about models, I think many of us think about a business model. A business model describes the rationale of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value in economic, social, cultural, or other contexts. The business model canvas is a scaffold that identifies the core aspects of a business as 9 building blocks. The underpinning for a business model is another model, the economic model. The theory of the firm is based on growth and making money. Economist Kate Raworth calls this old thinking Peter Pan economics, because an economy is never considered to have reached maturity. It must keep growing forever. But unlimited growth is never considered healthy in natural systems. In our bodies, we call it cancer, Raworth said. Other economists have pointed out the devastation to people and nature caused by the blind pursuit of profit, and whether growth is environmentally sustainable. Raworth belongs to the evonomics movement that started with the global financial crisis in 2008. Her contribution is the donut economic model. Last April, the city of Amsterdam announced it will embrace the donut model to amend their post-coronavirus economy. Economic models are closely tied to political models. Depending on the political persuasion, government may be a big player as a regulator or shareholder, or maybe not even a player at all. Let's see how models can act as scaffolds. As we said, the nature of the system constrains how we can act in it. In the order system, we can use reductionist engineering approach. We work with known knowns, known unknowns, and known unknowns are also called risk. We can create a model and break it down to show its parts, such as people, process, technology. An order system is governed and rigidly constrained in such a way that cause and effect relationships are either clear or found through analysis by experts. Constraints are typically human-imposed, like policies, standards, rules, and best practices. The complex system is different. There is only one model. As Murray Gell-Mann said, the only valid model of a complex system is the system itself. In 1984, Gell-Mann co-founded the Santa Fe Institute, a research center dedicated to studying complex systems. When dealing with the human aspects of a complex system, he came up with the term complex adaptive systems. As you saw earlier, our perspective or paradigm is a holistic ecological approach. We face the knowns, unknown, and known. Unknown known sounds weird. Another label could be tacit knowledge. It's a knowledge in a person's head, so it's known, but not explicitly documented, so unknown to anyone else. It's also a frustration that CEOs will mutter, "Why am I the last one to know about this? Everyone knows about it except me." We deal with messy, entangled, and constantly changing relationships. Fortunately, natural constraints enable underlying patterns to be formed. Let's move on to frameworks. As typological containers, frameworks provide categories for thinking and classifying, which is very useful. The McKinsey 7S framework was developed over 30 years ago. Recently, MIT and Glassdoor created this framework called the Ultimate Culture Scorecard. The weakness of frameworks is that they can oversimplify and ignore the messiness and entanglement of complex systems. They can also limit our perspective by prematurely focusing us on just a few dimensions. Who's to say there are only 7 organizational effectiveness factors, or only 9 cultural values? Last month, Barack Obama published an article, How I Approach the Toughest Decisions. He wrote about a decision-making framework to consider choices. Political problems are complex. Presidential-level problems are wicked, and they don't have one perfect answer. A problem that an org change effort attempts to resolve often will have internal and possibly external political implications. Treating a political problem as one in the order system with a final solution is the equivalent to using a hammer to nail a screw. The scaffold that we need is a decision-making framework that helps us to make choices in context. If you Google decision-making framework, you'll see that there are many. I'll share with you one that is used in almost every conceivable sector, whether strategy, police work, international development, public policy, military, counterterrorism, safety, energy, healthcare, sales, or education. The framework recently has been adopted by the European Commission's Policy Department as a main strategic framework and as a field guide on leading and managing in crisis. The way we act and make decisions is different depending on the system you are in. Let's improve our view by making the following changes. Let's split order into 2 domains, complicated and clear. Add one domain in the middle, called confused. Confused is the state of not knowing where you are. This is the Cynefin framework. To get the language right, it's not a 2x2 matrix with 5 quadrants. No, it's a sense-making framework to support decision makers. We make sense of the present so that we can act appropriately. This is a 3D version of the Cynefin framework, which shows the domains are at different elevations. These are energy levels. The order system is high level because it's human imposed. The complicated domain is where policies, standards, rules, procedures are produced. It takes a lot of energy to stay in the clear domain. Think of the time and effort and money required to maintain best practices, the training, compliance checking, reporting, the punishing, the auditing. If you're a company HR or OD employee, you reside in the complicated domain as an expert or specialist. This probably explains why you are so tired. Climbing up and down the ladder to service the employees in a clear domain can be really exhausting. In comparison, the complex and chaotic domains are natural occurrences. Of course, you want to avoid the chaotic domain. It requires a lot of hard work by managers and HR folks, keeping employees in the clear domain away from the edge of chaos and inadvertently plunging down the cliff where they will suffer a physical change, be it a human accident, equipment breakdown, facility damage. Maps provide a way of situating ourselves. They give us an understanding of where we are on an org change journey. Most of us see the world through the lens of a Mercator map. The center of the map runs through Greenwich. The equator splits the world into the northern and southern hemisphere. There's a North Pole at the top and a South Pole located at the bottom. In my elementary school years, I logically assumed that rivers flowed south, from top to bottom. That's how gravity flowed. Plus, Antarctica was huge. Well, look at it. Counter maps offer different representations of the real world. The one on the left is called an orthograph. It's a rectangular world map made by equally dividing a spherical surface into 96 triangles. An orthograph has less distortion because the world map can be tiled in any direction without visible seams. From this map tiling, a new world map with a triangular or rectangular outline can be framed out with various regions at the center. The map on the right has Antarctica at the center. Two maps show the Marshall Islands. Both provide a means of positioning, communicating where you are presently situated, and afford a sense of direction. The map on the left is a traditional government map for tourists. The one on the right is a counter map. It's a stick chart made and used by the Marshallese to navigate the Pacific Ocean by canoe. These charts represented major ocean swell patterns and the ways the islands disrupted those patterns, typically determined by sensing disruptions in ocean swells by islands during sea navigation. These are physical maps. We also have mind maps. Mind maps are formed from beliefs and paradigms. As I mentioned under models, beliefs and paradigms can be economic and political. We also carry them for natural science and the real world. Since the 2nd century, the Catholic Church strongly supported Ptolemy's theory of an Earth-centered universe. In 1543, Copernicus published a countermap, his theory of the universe with the sun at the center. In 1616, Galileo was accused of being a heretic and was told that he should no longer publicly state his belief that the Earth moved around the sun. But he chose to continue his study of astronomy and became more and more convinced that all planets revolved around the sun. In 1632, he published a book that stated the heliocentric theory of Copernicus was correct. This time the Inquisition found him guilty of heresy, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1633. 350 years later, in 1992, the Vatican formally acknowledged its error and admitted Galileo was right. We see the world not as it is, but as we are. We need to face the facts with both eyes open. Beliefs and paradigms can turn into cognitive biases. The everyday language we speak can unconsciously express those biases. Comedians like Jerry Seinfeld know this very well and exploit the opportunity to make us laugh. If you're left-handed, this bit from his book probably resonates with you. Topographical maps can display logical relationships between items. With the advancements in computer hardware and software, in particular information technology, business process reengineering and ERP projects were all the rage beginning in the 1990s. Transformation projects were developed mainly with one eye open in the order system. Maps gave us a sense of where we were moving from the present to a predictable future. Maps segmented work into well-defined sequential phases or stages. Scaling was treated as a simple matter of cloning and replicating throughout the entire organization. To manage design and implementation, BPR projects were broken down into people, process, and technology teams. Big consultancies licensed the people methods and tools from ODR and Daryl Connor. I was at Ernst & Young Consulting in strategy and transformation. I think I still have several 3-ring binders stored somewhere on a bookshelf. The commitment curve was one template and mapped the behavior changes expected from workers. Clients were given a map showing how stressful and energy draining the change process could be. Unfortunately, we quite often left people in the valley, unable to climb up to the other side. Forbes once reported that 25% of technology projects fail outright. 20 to 25% don't show any return on investment, and 50% needed massive reworking by the time they were finished. Was the problem because the people refused to get with the program? Or perhaps failure was because we, the organization change consultants, only had one eye open. Complex maps recognize the natural constraints that enable underlying patterns to be formed. The map on the right is a wind map. Sailors learned how to harness the patterns of wind streams. The Marshallese canoeists created their stick charts on these patterns. It's easy to see why in 1492, Columbus discovered countries of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And on his second voyage to the Americas, why he discovered Puerto Rico. In essence, he followed the natural contours of the landscape rather than trying to impose an ordered structure. How might we apply what we know about natural constraints enabling underlying patterns to be formed? Then, like Columbus, we can conserve energy, ride the wind, and flow with the natural contours. Well, from research in anthropology, we know that patterns naturally occur in human storytelling. Therefore, we can produce maps that are generated from experiences and observations shared by employees as storytellers. On the left is a triangular heat map and a narrative landscape map on the right. Each dot is a story. A map affords a sense of direction. In this illustration, it would be the desire to move from red X to green check mark. Let's turn our attention now to deciding what should be in our toolbox. With all the stuff I've been accumulating over the years as an engineer, manager, consultant, and facilitator, I really should be talking about a tool shed. I really have 2 sets of tools, or perhaps a set for each eye. In the order system, I'll pull out my trusty hammer on my mechanics tool belt. These are the fix-it tools I got good at using as an engineer and manager. In the complex system, I switched to be a gardener carrying a watering can. These are the nudge-it tools I picked up as a consultant and facilitator. I quite enjoy visiting mega stores like Home Depot, Lowe's, Tooltown, and in Canada, Canadian Tire. I'll go there usually with a purpose in mind, buy glue to fix a ceramic cup, maybe energy-saving light bulbs on sale. When I first enter, I'm always mesmerized by the number of aisles stacked with stuff, right up to the rafters. If I'm not careful, I can easily forget what I came to buy and leave with a bunch of new tools. Or the time I needed to replace a broken drill bit. The salesman, however, convinced me that my need wasn't a drill bit, but a better way to make a hole. I'm too embarrassed to tell you what's sitting in my tool shed. So I need a shopping list as a reminder, and a checklist that pauses me to ask, do I really need this tool? I have 4 questions on my checklist. The first question on my checklist is the tool grounded on change principles or values. I'll look to see if the tool includes an exercise where shared values are crafted. Principles are timeless, universal, natural laws. They happen whether you know it or not. They're impersonal, factual, objective, self-evident truths. They set the interaction between people, and they govern consequences. Values are sets of beliefs and opinions. They are personal, emotional, subjective, arguable social norms. Values are things that people believe are worthy today, but maybe not tomorrow. They often are crafted as shared values, they can be construed as platitudes, and they govern behavior. I spent several years facilitating strategic retreats where managers would craft the big three: mission, vision, and values. I wish I knew back then what I know now. Shared values can be a mixed bag of principles, platitudes, and consequences that emerge. What you see in the flip chart is quite typical. Honesty is a principle. Teamwork. I've seen this so often it's become a platitude. Kind of a remark or statement, especially with one with a moral content, that has been used too often, really, to be meaningful now. Safety first. Why safety? Why not customer, shareholder, employee? Profit. Clearly a belief and opinion for today that will govern behavior. But for how long? Tomorrow it might be market share, which is a different set of behaviors. Also sets up a potential conflict with safety first. Trust. Very interesting. Is it a principle, platitude, value? Trust is actually like profit and safety. All three are consequences that emerge. You can't control them. What you can control are the conditions that enable them to emerge. Trust is an emergent property of people's interactions over time. The condition that each person controls is trustworthiness. If I behave in a trustworthy manner, then people over time will trust me. The tool or scaffold I'm looking for is principle-centered, or at least the values listed are principles. In a world of constant turmoil, it's nice to have a grounding that is eternal and doesn't change. I want a tool that isn't a fad and will be useful for many years. Question 2. Is the tool case-based or theory-informed? Ever notice at a fire that firefighters show up on the scene? There's a positive correlation between the number of firemen fighting a fire and the size of the fire. People looking for cause and effect will jump to conclusions. Firefighters are the cause of fires. Or bringing more firefighters will cause the size of the fire to increase. Clearly, this is confusing correlation with causation, and it happens frequently. Business book authors have a tendency to falsely claim causation. You know, if these 5 easy steps are followed, then any organization will be guaranteed to get amazing results. Or a book written by a recently retired CEO, by following what I did, you too can be just as successful as me. In 1982, Tom Peters and Bob Waterman, while at McKinsey, published In Search of Excellence. Here's a fun fact. They used the 7S framework to rate an organization's ability to change. Jim Collins released Good to Great in 2001. Both are bestsellers, but later were highly criticized. I'm looking for a tool that is reliable, which means whatever it promises to do, it will continue to do so. The alternative is a tool that is theory-informed. Theory is testing an hypothesis. Let's understand what we know from theory and design a scaffold based on that, rather than what we think might work because of what worked for us the last time. The word theory is used in science to refer to an embracing concept for which there are abundant experimental and observational bases. The key phrase is abundant experimental and observational basis. So I'm wary of a tool that is based on published research that is false. Many scientific studies are difficult or impossible to replicate or reproduce. The replication crisis affects the social sciences and medicine most severely. This 2x2 matrix outlines 4 methods. 2 on the left use the scientific method, and 2 on the right use observation and hypothesis. Classic science has the green light because it can predict and is scalable with little risk involved. The science shown in the Wikipedia picture is natural science. The branches are chemistry, space science, earth science, physics, life sciences. The top left is the Cynefin framework and what Dave Stonin calls naturalizing sense-making. That also has a green light. Over in the top right are the case-based methods. The methods are valuable, but as I discussed earlier, the findings may be questionable due to a correlation versus causation problem. So they get a yellow light. And on the bottom right is the big red light, pseudoscience, because the method predicts based on minimal evidence and scaling is really high risk. In his 2007 book, The Halo Effect, Philip Rosenzweig deemed In Search of Excellence and Good to Great as pseudoscience. Next question. When I operate the tool, do I move backwards or forwards? That is, does your organization change to start with an idealistic, desired future and track backwards to the present? This method is quite practical. It's how we are trained to ride a bike or ski down a slope. First thing we learn is not how to go fast, but how to stop. That's backwards learning. If you are confident that you can predict the future, go for it. Just be sure that the method is based on real science, not pseudoscience. If I like it, I'll add it to my mechanics tool belt in a Kinevin complicated domain. The metaphor is a train railing on a track. The destination is known, and a linear straight line is the best way to get there. Planning decisions come at the beginning. Where do we lay the lines? What are the barriers and risk? The plan is direct and fixed. Success results in operating efficiently and managing deviations to stay on track. We need skillful project management to make it happen, and we'll measure with lagging scorecard. Alternatively, when I operate the tool, do I move forwards by beginning in the present and navigate towards an emerging future? I might have to do that because I'm concerned that a desired end in mind isn't very clear, or my list of assumptions in the business case is so huge, it's extremely possible that what I'm forecasting may never materialize. If so, then I'm in the complex domain. The metaphor is a tiny boat sailing on a vast sea of unknown unknowns. Planning decisions are constantly made. How do we adjust to the wind, the water, the competition? The path is oblique. You will be off heading 98% of the time. Success results from evolving the present, being adaptable, and ready to pivot based on consequences. Skillful navigation required. And we monitor with a leading dashboard. Seafarers are like gardeners. As a gardener, I can't order plants to grow in a particular size and shape. All I can do is create the conditions that influence plants to dispositionally grow in my desired direction. Both are valid methods that work well in their applicable domain. This is what we call bounded applicability. The right tools are being applied in the appropriate Kinevin domain. I really hope I don't see a hammer being used to pound a plant to make it grow, a rake pulling a plant out of the soil to check its roots, or a watering can being used to oil an engine. An abundance of volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity will sink your train. Conversely, a boat doesn't travel very well on dry land. Plus, you'll drive everybody nuts trying to float your boat. Here are a couple of popular tools that operate backwards: ProSize AdCar and John Cotter's Leading Change. They start with an idealistic future and develop a linear sequential path by tracking backwards to the present. A variation adds timing details to create a project management Gantt chart. In this example, I developed a roadmap with an electric utility. We began by crafting a smart grid vision, then broke into people, process, technology, and strategy teams. Each team worked independently to define their deliverables in a phase of the transformation. Finally, we came together and moved boxes around to build an input-output timing sequence. When buying glue to fix a broken ceramic cup, it's important to read the instructions, or at least the words printed on the packaging. Language will tell me if the glue is the proper glue for ceramic, or maybe it's for fastening wood. If I read org change language as shown, I'm pretty darn sure it's designed for the complicated domain. In comparison, the language in the complex domain is very different. We see abductive, not inductive nor deductive reasoning, modulators, not drivers, holism, not engineering, safe to fail, not fail safe, fractal, not homogeneous, coherence, not alignment, and coevolution, not transformation. During this conference, I'm personally hoping to see more tools designed for the complex domain. One tool is the vector theory of change developed by Dave Snowden at Cognitive Edge. Another scaffold in the complex domain was introduced by John Cotter in 2014. Compare that to his 1996 leading change version. Cotter says both versions are relevant and effective today, but they are designed to serve different contexts and objectives. Once again, the concept of bounded applicability. Last question on my checklist. I get really excited when I stumble across an all-new, all-purpose tool. To repair my ceramic cup, I didn't buy a ceramic glue, but a bonding pen that uses ultraviolet light. And because it can bond many types of material, it's all-purpose. Is this another case where Gary goes hunting for an adhesive and takes home something else that does plastic welding? Yeah, I admit it was, but that's the fun part of shopping, to be surprised by new and cool things. This time, though, I did do my homework, and the tool doesn't take up any space next to my handy-dandy hole maker. In org change, an all-purpose tool is a boundary-spanning tool, one that can span over system boundaries and operate between the order, complexity, and to a lesser degree, chaos. The transition between systems is represented by that red arc. On the diagram on the right, the dynamic flow between systems is better viewed as an explore-exploit loop on the Cynefin framework. Cynefin dynamics can describe any strategy that an organization chooses. In 2017, Dave Snowden introduced a liminal version of the Cynefin framework. Liminal means a temporary holding space while you prepare for the transition. The liminal zones are shaded in green, considered as the time climbing up and down the ladder in the 3D illustration. The most stable strategy is explore-exploit, shown in the blue, and flows between the complex and the complicated domains. When new ideas are sought, we enter the complex domain. Then either naturally or by launching safe-to-fail experiments, we monitor the emergence of new patterns, which might lead to novel solutions. We take these into the green liminal space to see if we can create repeatable outcomes by either loosening or tightening system constraints. If that works, we then move to the complicated to exploit. However, we must not be complacent. So we monitor for non-repeatability, and if it happens, then we move back to complex. Context dictates the natural cadence of flow. It will be a short timescale in retail, a longer one in manufacturing. Context will also determine the Cynefin dynamic loop or strategy to choose. A preferred strategy consumes the least amount of energy possible. Think of sailing and riding the wind patterns. For agile teams in software development, the blue loop is practiced. It's the iterative flow of checking with users, investors in the complex domain, and taking any new information back to the complicated to do more coding. In manufacturing, we know that as the PDCA cycle, plan, do, check, and act. It's the continual flow between stability in the order system and agility in the complex. In other terminology, it's strengthening robustness and building resilience. The green arrow is a strategic choice to strengthen robustness by programming robots to execute very stable processes. Production line robotics is a big investment strategy, as depicted by being way up high in the Cynefin clear domain. The yellow loop is disruptive innovation. The org change strategy is to shake up things to implement new, novel ideas. From a Cynefin dynamics perspective, this is a shallow dive into chaos, breaking up established practices to allow new ideas to merge and bring new changes into the complicated domain to implement. The task then becomes to shift from the yellow loop to the more stable blue loop. If the context is constant volatility and uncertainty, org change may best be handled by the purple loop. Stability is difficult, so remain primarily in the complex domain. Change interventions are small, faster with real-time feedback loops, and with more distributed leadership. There is no value in documenting best practices since they quickly will become obsolete. This is increasingly common in public health, consumer goods, social computing. Just consider how we are fighting COVID-19 and the need to respond to mutation. In summary, what org change tools should be in your toolbox or tool shed? If you know for sure the desired future state is predictable with well-defined outcomes, you're in the order system, so you can use mechanic tools to engineer the org change. Note the relative sizes of the three systems. Complexity is much larger for a reason. Every time a new relationship is created, the level of complexity naturally increases exponentially. It's neither good or bad, it's natural. Consequently, I would invest more money in guardian tools to work in the complex system. Ethnography tools to capture and make sense of stories, narrative inquiry, including appreciative inquiry, dialogic OD, safe to fail experiments, nudging. Instead of designing rigid hierarchies, how about we think about designing dynamic scaffolds that accommodate emergence and keep us tuned in as the context shifts, and move away from the one-off org change project transformation to ongoing sustainable evolution. And oh yeah, there's one more set of tools. Survival tools when chaos breaks out to quickly act and fight off the attacks of the zombies. That's my presentation. I think, Nancy, I want to turn this over to you for if there's any.
First of all, there was a question about what you would provide following up this presentation, whether there would be slides, but I think you mentioned you're going to put this on YouTube. I think that might be helpful just off the bat, let people know.
Yeah, I think what I want to do is, first of all, get some comments, responses to what I've done. Definitely the video presentation I've just done will be published. If you want specific slides, just let me know, and I can send them to you and have a chat with you on anything we've got there.
In the session, we began with a question, what is the name of the woman who offers the donut model?
Kate Raworth, Raworth. One of the things that she's done, which I think is the way people are going, is they're opening up labs. So again, it's all about practicing. So she's got a theory, and now she actually has opened up labs. And Amsterdam, for example, was part of her labs. They saw what you like, and now they want to put that in practice.
Okay. And there was a question about the definition of framework that you shared.
Try to use that. This is the one that talks a bit about models, frameworks as well. If anybody got questions, maybe they want to ask a question. If you want to open up your mic, we can do that.
You've got a few more here too. You author any books?
The only book. This is interesting. I mean, this practice. Let me explain. I am part of the Cognitive Edge Network, and we actually have a lot of articles, videos, things like that. We really don't have a lot of books until this past year, where 46 of us actually got together and collectively wrote a book called the Cynefin book. And that's now available. You can go to Amazon.com and you can download both the hard copy or else the Kindle version. Again, what we do in Cognitive Edge is there's not a lot of proprietary stuff. A lot of it is open source. That's Dave Snowden's view, is that if you want to get this thing out to the world and people start using it, just make it readily available. So the Kindle edition, for example, is less than $10 if you want the book. The chapter I wrote in there, I co-authored with the Vice President, Michael Chevaldet, happens to talk about taking this view in safety.
Yeah. Amish has a question here. He says, I wonder if there is any insight in your presentation thinking around what has been recently popular, namely, how to take fragile or robust systems and see if it is possible to make them more anti-fragile. What in the tool shed could help in such a situation?
One of the things that we look at is constraints. There are natural constraints and there are human imposed constraints, policies, rules, whatever here. And more often than not, in our practices, we'll take up one of those narrative maps, show them decision makers, and kind of ask the question, why do you think people are behaving this way? And they come up with the answers. They'll say, oh, it's Rule 42 or Policy 17. And our reply is, it could be, we don't know for sure. Well, let's launch a safety field experiment and explore that and see what the workers, the employees tell us. And how do they tell us? They tell us by entering stories. And from the stories, you can then see these maps then will dynamically change because they're built around stories. And this is how we kind of always remain in the current, because we're working off a map that's constantly changing 24/7.
Gary's going to be helping me this afternoon on my session of 4 o'clock, and we talk about stories as data. And I so appreciate that folks are answering each other's questions. And so if somebody has a lingering question that is not being answered, please type that in now. I'm trying to look through the questions and I'm seeing that some of them are being answered.
There's a really nice feature, by the way, on the chat panel. If you look at on the right, the dot, 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 you can save the chat onto your own computer. I'm recording this thing, so I have the chat automatically saved. That's a worthwhile to do because I get a lot of value by going back through the chats and picking up comments from other people here. And I think these are the fun things about Zoom sessions where you pick up a lot of things that you didn't think about.
Yeah. So you already mentioned the recording will be uploaded to YouTube. You're going to need to go to Gary's website, which have you provided us with your website?
Yeah, my website is, I didn't give any profile of me at the beginning. If you actually go into the Change Management Network profiles, I think I have some of my details there. I'm actually also on LinkedIn. So I've been getting a couple notifications that people want to connect with me on LinkedIn. Please do that as well. Because it's another way of just staying connected and building relationships.
Yeah. Is there a go-to tool most used by Gary?
Well, the tool that we're really playing around with now is this vector theory of change. Because I think we're realizing that we're in this purple loop a lot. But honestly, there are times, and Reg kind of said it previously, there are times that maybe we can do prediction, and maybe there's a certain goal that we want to achieve. Then by all means, head over to the order system. But the vector theory of change actually is a boundary spanning tool, and it covers all three systems for all 5 domains. That's one that we've been getting a lot of traction in using.
Somebody wants to know if you could give an example of using the watering can tools. Do you combine tools there?
Oh, well, number one, I won't admit that I'm a great gardener, but I do know enough about gardening and the ideal of natural laws. I mean, you cannot force a plant to grow. You can only create the conditions, fertilizer, water, sun, provide those, and then the plant itself will decide to grow. And honestly, the plant may grow to become a weed and not the kind of desired plant that you want. That's the mystery of complexity. That's all about emergence as well.
Could you comment on the role of improvisation in change? This is from Paolo. The role of improvisation in change. Can organizing improvisation represent a framework?
If improvisation is creating surprise, if improvisation is meant to kind of disrupt, if improvisation is meant to kind of shake things up and allow people to see other paradigms, and I say yes, there's lots of room for improvisation. What I presented today, by the way, is kind of like a very high level strategic view at the organization level. And I appreciate too that there are other presentations. They're at the team level maybe, and also at the individual level as well. I think there's lots of room for everything. I just happen to be at that high level there. And improv, I think, as a very nice way, just like Jerry Seinfeld has done, introducing humor. I think improvs can do that as well. And if the idea is to kind of like shake people out of their strongly held beliefs and paradigms, then so be it. I'd say go for it.
Mm-hmm. There's somebody here, Lisa. I'm sorry. Was there somebody here that wants to talk?
I was trying to ask, sorry, I was trying to ask a question. Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, sorry about that. Hi, I'm curious if you wouldn't mind going back to the loops that you did. You said like the blue loop is liminal and that was like the safest space. If you could just walk through that one more time, because that loop stuff was great and it might be new to many of us.
Yeah. That's the one?
Yes.
Okay. When the previous question about what are we working on right now, this is the sort of stuff that we are looking at. And as the title says, context determines a dynamic loop. So this is what Connect actually means. Connect actually means that, know where you are today. If you are in the blue loop, that's the most common stable form. This is what agile software teams kind of use. The idea is that, okay, I'm coding in the complicated domain, and now I have to go out and check to kind of see if I'm still on base with the client, with the customer, with the investor. Yes, I am. Then coming back and keep on coding, right? So this is this iterative stuff we do in Agile as opposed to waterfall. Now, what's interesting here is that if we talk about liminal, that green space between complex and complicated, that's what Scrum is. That's where Scrum resides. Because Scrum is kind of playing with that transition between the different boundaries. Okay. Now, there are cases here where you're in the blue loop and people coming back says here, man, we're really, the world has really changed. Things have happened that we did not anticipate. It's the unknowns that are biting us. That may signal that, we have to now move into the yellow loop. We're going to have to disrupt something. So that's where you kind of see the shallow dive into chaos. There's literally going down there to create some confusion here and go like, what the hell is going on here? Get people to let go. I mean, that's what improv can do as well, for example. And that allows then you to say, let's do some probing and exploring now that we've kind of shaken things up, and we can look at better ideas or solutions that are emerging. Okay? So once you do that and you come back and you say, oh yeah, we've got some really cool ideas, let's bring them back and document. Hopefully you can get out of the yellow loop and you can get back on the blue loop. Mm-hmm. There's one point that I should mention here, and it really shows up on your 3D Connect framework. I don't like best practices. I don't like having employees in the clear domain. And you can see why. We actually set them up for danger because they can fall off the cliff. And how often do we kind of have that where we're following the best practices or these are the rules, you must follow them. And workers going, we can't do it. They're getting in the way of work. So they do workarounds and all that sort of stuff. It's really prevalent in the world of safety, where you must follow rules, clearly because you don't want to fall off the edge and have an accident. But it so restricts the workers that there's some thought is there, let's not have anybody in a clear domain. let's make every employee some sort of a specialist or expert and keep them down in the complicated domain where they can blue loop and they can yellow loop, but don't do green arrow.
So just for clarification, I'm looking at the 3D model, and if memory served previously on another slide, there was the blue loop that was going between complex and complicated at that
Yes.
higher space. So
Yes.
that's what I was trying to sort of see. It was a little bit challenging for me to be able to look between
Right there,
3D and the non-3D, right?
right
Yes.
there, that one. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can see in the elevation differences, they're actually not that, the ladder is kind of short. So it's actually not difficult to do. And that's why the agile teams are doing this. In fact, history says the reason why Dave created the liminal spaces is because the agile team says, Dave, your earlier model isn't working, framework isn't working for us. So he developed the idea of liminal with the agile community.
Many thanks.
Gary, there's just a couple questions here that have to do with perhaps how you select a model to suit your situation, and kind of related to that, the diagnostic process that you use when going in to work with a client.
Yeah, okay. The key thing is, it's not where we are, it's where the client is. So you always got to start where the client is. So the practice that we do is find out what is your current state. And we do that by asking questions. And we actually talk about what's your past experiences? What are your past observations? We can collect those stories. And like I'll show tomorrow in the vector change, we can create these narrative maps. So quite often what we do, once we have a map up and running, we'll share it with decision makers and say, this is your map. In some cases, this is actually representation of your culture. This is what people are saying. This is what people are believing. Because culture can be looked at as that kind of emergent set of stories that people share every day. So I'm actually quite bold in kind of saying, you know what we got now? We actually have a way to visually see culture, which we've never been able to do before. That's the starting point. And from that starting point, I can go like, what's our next step? And we go from there.
Okay, great. Thank you for everyone that's asking questions. I would like to just, if anyone else would like to, go off video or come on and ask Gary a question, I think we've got some time here for you to do that. There's also questions here. How did you get from engineering to this point in your career? And is there any tricks, can you say of any, facts that you know of that are out there right now? I think you identified one. I think that best practices you might put in that category as a fad. I don't know, but anyway, that is a couple of the questions that are.
I have a question about Gary had mentioned an eye. Are you saying an eye as your perspective and we're missing multiple perspectives?
Yeah. Putting forward his heliocentric theory, Copernicus said that we needed to face the facts as they are with both eyes opened. I realized that my education as an engineer left me with one eye open. I learned all about in school about the ordered system. It was if-then causal, very predictive, and you can actually create systems that would operate very well. Complexity science and the study of complex systems wasn't even offered at the university. When I later moved into management, life was good, especially when people follow the rules and behave like they should, just like machines. But there were the odd times when somebody would not follow the rules or they would behave in a way that I could not figure out. Of course, now I realize that's the complex domain, which is dispositional, not causal. But it wasn't until 30 years after graduating that I discovered the complex system to go along with the order system and, of course, chaos. And it was just over 10 years ago that things started to come together for me when I discovered the Canavan framework, and along with that, and an introduction to the social sciences, anthropology, and distributed ethnography. I'm probably a good example of what lifelong learning is all about.
Mhm. Great. You've got more here. And some of these are repeats. So I'm going to just stick with a few of the new ones that are coming up. It could, let's see, could you advise on a literature, a book, an article or so, which would be an excellent foundation to get into his line of thought? Wow. You've got so many lines of thought. I don't know. But again, I think this is a question wanting to know how to learn a little bit more about, what is behind your
Yeah.
thoughts. And
Yeah, I'm only one practitioner of very, very many practitioners. If you want to go into my website, very simple. It's just gswong.com. I've tried to put some stuff on there. There's a fair number of downloads. I also recommend that you go into cognitiveedge.com. That's where a lot of my stuff on complexity thinking has come from as well. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, and if you want lots of references and sources, certainly can do that.
I think as well, just in terms of this diagnostic process, more questions about sort of how you know where an organization is at. I think you kind of addressed that. I don't know if you want to say more. Certainly, it seems to me as a practitioner, you have evolved your methods over time. You probably don't have, I think you've said this, one size fits all. I don't know if there's anything more you'd like to add to your
Just,
questions.
just a couple other points. I'm a real fan of Edgar Schein's work.
Mm,
And I think a book that really is good, everybody should read, is Humble Leadership.
mhm.
And the idea is that it's okay to say no. It's okay to say, I don't know. In fact, when we get involved in engagements, I'm very happy to say, I don't know. Let's go find out.
Great. Well, you have just a few minutes here. It's 1:27. We're closing the session out here in a few minutes. Is there anyone else I've got, see something else coming up. Love Shine. Yep. Edgar Shine's great. Is there any questions? I'm sure I've missed a few questions here. It was just a very busy session with people coming in, and I wasn't always able to interpret exactly what the question was intending. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Sure.
Great.
I want to go back. You did an analogy, Gary, and you said you are not able to force a plant to grow,
Mhm.
and it may grow to be weeds. Can you go back to that, please, and explain that a little more?
Okay, so if we're gardening, we're actually in the complex domain. We really can't force the plant to grow. We can only influence it to grow because there's so many unknown factors. We can only create the conditions, fertilizer, water, sunshine, and enable that growth, that direction that we kind of want to happen. And we see that in humans every day with families. With my 3 adult kids, I did not treat them as machines, like you will grow up and be an engineer, Russell. Jen, you will be X, whatever. All I could do with my wife and I is create the conditions for them to kind of grow. And along the way, you can influence them, you can nudge them, you can do small little things. Don't go there. Maybe want to look at that. And as they do, they develop to whatever person they want to be. When I do tomorrow's vector theory of change, if you're a mother or you're a father, that's probably how you have been raising your children. It's natural. It's not human imposed. It's just natural. I think we've come to the end of the time. First of all, I want to say thank you, Nancy, for being my co-host, for sticking out that, or I don't know how I would do it without you. So I really, really appreciate it. So I just got to do just as good or gooder for you when your session comes.
No, I'm going to have to listen to your whole session again because I was so busy with these dings going on. But I'm so happy that people were able to get in, and it was almost like, I think 370 some people at one point. So a lot of people in the session today, and it was just fascinating.
Well, I appreciate everybody joining us. And I'm like you, I'm up there attending the different sessions because I want to learn as well. And I want to know, how does yours fit in with what I'm doing? Are there any differences? So I'm always looking for similarities, differences, and surprises. I hope I get to see a few surprises that make you go like, oh, I want to maybe go and buy that. Thank you for joining Nancy and me. Have fun.